When people first start recognizing codependent patterns, a common overcorrection is swinging hard towards self-sufficiency, deciding to need no one, to handle everything alone, to avoid ever again feeling as dependent on someone else's approval as they once did. This is an entirely understandable reaction, born out of real pain, but it mistakes the actual problem. The issue was never needing people in the first place. Needing people is a basic, healthy, deeply human part of being alive. Humans are, after all, a fundamentally social species, wired from infancy onward to depend on others for survival and well-being alike. The issue was a specific kind of needing, one where your stability depended entirely on someone else's mood or approval, leaving no room for you to exist as a separate person with your own internal center of gravity. Interdependence describes a different, sturdier model. Two people, each reasonably whole and self-regulating on their own, who choose to rely on each other anyway, because connection is part of a good life rather than a threat to be managed or a weakness to overcome. This distinction matters enormously in practice. Independence as overcorrection often leaves people lonelier than they were before, having traded one source of pain, losing themselves in others, for another, the quiet, persistent ache of never letting anyone close enough to matter. Interdependence allows for genuine need without losing the self that's doing the needing, which is precisely the balance that codependency, in its various forms, was never able to strike. In practice, healthy interdependence shows up in small, observable, almost mundane ways, rather than as some dramatic relational ideal. Both people can express a need or a preference without elaborate justification or preemptive guilt. "I'd really like some support with this" doesn't require a long explanation of why that need is valid or reasonable. The need simply gets stated, and the other person gets to respond honestly, without either side treating the request as an imposition. It also shows up in how each person tolerates the other's difficult emotions. Both people can sit with the other being upset without immediately needing to fix it, smooth it over, or quietly take responsibility for having caused it. There's a kind of steadiness here, the capacity to stay present with someone's pain without either collapsing into it or rushing to make it disappear. It shows up too in how disagreement is handled. Differences of opinion don't threaten the relationship's basic stability because each person's sense of self isn't entirely on the line every time they disagree about something. And crucially, both people maintain a life outside the relationship: friendships, interests, solitary time, professional pursuits, not as evidence of distance or lukewarm commitment, but as the actual foundation that makes closeness sustainable rather than suffocating. Paradoxically, relationships with the most room for separateness often turn out to be the ones with the deepest, most durable closeness, because neither person is quietly drowning in the other. A surprising but remarkably consistent finding across relationship research is that people's capacity for healthy connection often depends heavily on their capacity to be comfortably alone. If solitude feels unbearable, if being by yourself for an evening triggers restlessness, anxiety, or a scramble to fill the silence with noise or company, relationships can end up carrying an unfair weight, expected to fill a void that connection alone was never designed to fill on its own. Rebuilding this capacity doesn't require grand gestures, retreats, or dramatic lifestyle changes. It can start with small, deliberate stretches of time spent without distraction or company, not as punishment or deprivation, but as quiet practice. This might mean an hour with no phone, a solo walk without a podcast, or simply sitting with a cup of tea and your own thoughts, instead of immediately reaching for company or distraction. Over time, many people find that solitude shifts from something to escape into something that can feel restorative, even genuinely necessary. A place where they reconnect with their own preferences, thoughts, and sense of self, separate from whoever else happens to be nearby. Counterintuitively, this often makes relationships better, not worse, because you're choosing connection from a place of wanting it, rather than needing it desperately to survive the discomfort of being alone with yourself. A person who can tolerate their own company tends to bring a calmer, less anxious presence into every relationship they're part of. Codependent patterns often involve trying to manage another person's flaws, moods, struggles, or even mistakes as if they were your own responsibility to solve or prevent. Healthy interdependence requires a different stance entirely, allowing the people you love to be flawed, to struggle, and sometimes to make choices you wouldn't make yourself, without it becoming your job to intervene, correct, or rescue them from the consequences. This is one of the harder shifts to make because at first it can feel like indifference, or even like a kind of abandonment. It isn't. It's a recognition that another person's growth, including their mistakes and their own process of recovering from them, fundamentally belongs to them, not to you. You can stay close, stay caring, stay warmly present, and still let someone own the full reality of their own life, including the parts that aren't going well. Often, this is precisely what allows people to grow in the first place, in ways that constant rescuing, managing, or correcting tends to actually prevent. A person who is never allowed to face the natural consequences of their own choices rarely develops the confidence or competence that comes from navigating difficulty on their own. Letting someone be imperfect, paradoxically, is often one of the most respectful and loving things you can offer them. A quiet vote of confidence that they are capable of handling their own life, even when it's hard to watch from the sidelines. One of the clearest markers of healthy interdependence is direct communication of needs, stating plainly what you want or need, rather than hinting, over-functioning in hopes someone notices unprompted, or resentfully going without, and silently hoping to be appreciated later for the sacrifice. This requires practicing language that may feel unfamiliar at first. I need some time to myself this weekend, or I'd like us to talk about how we handle disagreements. Stated simply, without extensive justification, qualification, or preemptive apology tacked onto the end. This kind of directness can feel genuinely risky if you've spent years believing that stating a need clearly is selfish, demanding, or likely to drive someone away. Many people who grew up in environments where needs were dismissed or punished learn, quite reasonably, to bury them instead, to communicate through hints, sighs, or quiet resentment rather than plain language. In healthy relationships, though, the opposite tends to be true. Clear, honest communication of needs actually builds trust over time, because both people get to respond to what's genuinely true, rather than guessing at what's been left carefully unsaid. It also removes an enormous, often invisible burden, the exhausting work of managing how a need is perceived, rather than simply expressing it and trusting the other person to respond like an adult. Practicing this in low-stakes situations first, a small preference, a minor scheduling need, can build the confidence to use the same directness when the stakes are higher. If there's one idea to carry forward from this entire series, it's this. The goal was never to need people less. The goal is to need people from a place of wholeness rather than dependency, to bring a complete, separate self into every relationship, and to let the people you love do exactly the same. This kind of connection is sturdier than the merged, anxious version many of us learned growing up, precisely because it doesn't rely on either person disappearing in order to make room for the other. Building this takes real time, and it's rarely linear. Old patterns resurface, especially under stress, fatigue, or conflict. And that's a normal part of the process rather than a sign of failure or evidence that nothing has actually changed. What matters most is the overall direction toward relationships where you can be fully yourself, fully needed, and fully able to need others in return, without either side of that equation collapsing into the other. That's not a smaller or lesser kind of love than the all-consuming, merged version many of us were taught, implicitly or explicitly, to chase. It's a more durable one that can survive disagreement, distance, bad days, and ordinary human imperfection, because it was never built on the fragile premise that two people had to become one in order to truly belong to each other. Two whole people choosing each other again and again tends to outlast almost any version of love built on losing yourself.